Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly chilling journey deep into the heart of Joseon Dynasty, Korea, a land of strict Confucian ideals, elaborate court protocols, and absolute monarchical power. We're not focusing on the serene beauty of the palaces or the wisdom of the kings. Instead, we're pulling back the silken curtains to uncover what a royal divorce sucked like in the Joseon era. Forget amicable separations or negotiated settlements for a Joseon Queen. The end of a royal marriage was a terrifying descent into political ruin, public humiliation, and often a tragic and brutal fate. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the initial accusation without wishing for a quick end, let alone the entire agonizing process. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing in the opulent yet suffocating confines of the Joseon Royal Palace in Hanyang, modern-day Seoul. Perhaps during the 15th or 16th century, you are the Queen Jungjeon, the primary consort of the king, the symbolic mother of the nation, and the mother of the crown prince. Your position, seemingly supreme within the inner court, is the pinnacle of female power and prestige. You are adorned in magnificent robes, served by thousands of court ladies and eunuchs, and your word, while not absolute law, carries immense weight. However, your security, despite all this grandeur, is as fragile as a silken thread. Your very existence in the palace is intertwined with the king's favor, the intricate web of political factions, and, crucially, your ability to fulfill your primary duty, producing a male heir. This seemingly unshakable position can quickly turn precarious, transforming you from a revered queen to a vulnerable target. This is the fickle favor that defines your reign, and its unpredictable nature is the first step into the misery of a royal divorce. Imagine the subtle signs that would send a cold dread through your heart. Perhaps the king's visits to your chambers become less frequent, his attention shifting more consistently to a favored consort. You might hear whispers from your court ladies or eunuchs about a new concubine who has caught his eye, or who is subtly gaining influence. Your request for resources for your household might be subtly delayed or denied, indicating a waning of influence. These aren't just personal slights. In the rigid world of the palace, every shift in the king's attention is a public barometer of your declining power. It truly sucked to be a queen whose power was a weather vane. The king's favor, far from being a constant source of affection, is a deeply political tool. He might elevate a consort to undermine your birth family's influence, or he might distance himself from you to send a message to a challenging faction of scholar officials. His affections can be genuinely capricious, driven by personal preference, but they are just as often calculated moves in the intricate game of court politics. You are constantly attuned to his moods, his preferences, and the subtle shifts in his attention, knowing that your fate, and the fate of your powerful birth family, hinges entirely on his unpredictable will. The most common and most devastating reason for a queen's favor to turn fickle is often related to the issue of heirs. If you are the queen, fail to produce a male heir, or if your sons die young and a favored consort produces a healthy prince, your position becomes incredibly precarious. Your primary duty as the mother of the nation is to ensure dynastic continuity. Failure in this regard, or the presence of a viable alternative, gives immense leverage to rival factions who wish to see you replaced. The entire court, from the king's maternal relatives to various political factions, would scrutinize your fertility, turning your most private concerns into public gossip and political ammunition. Palace intrigue plays a crucial role in amplifying this fickleness. Rival consorts, desperate to elevate their own status and the position of their birth families, would constantly scheme against you. They might spread malicious rumors about your character, your piety, your health, or even accuse you of engaging in witchcraft against the king or his favored consorts. Eunuchs and court ladies, often serving as spies for various factions, would carry these whispers to the king's ear, subtly poisoning his opinion against you. You are constantly aware that your every move, every word, every supposed flaw could be magnified and used as a weapon in this ruthless game. It really sucked to be surrounded by snakes in silk robes. Consider the historical examples. Joseon history is unfortunately replete with instances of queens who fell from grace due to a combination of shifting royal favor, political maneuvering, and issues surrounding heirs. Queen Yun, mother of the tyrannical King Yeonsangun, was famously deposed and later poisoned due to alleged jealousy and a perceived threat to the king's favored consort. Queen In-hyun, during the reign of King Seokjong, was deposed due to the king's infatuation with royal consort Jang Hoibin, only to be reinstated later in a dramatic turn of events. These are not isolated incidents. They represent a recurring pattern of royal women as pawns in the volatile chessboard of Joseon politics. One common misconception is that a queen, once crowned, was absolutely untouchable, while a queen's position was indeed highly revered and her removal was a drastic political move. It was by no means impossible. The stability of the throne, the king's personal desires, and the fluctuating power of political factions could all conspire to depose a queen, especially if she lacked a strong political base or failed in her duty to produce a male heir. Her supreme status was powerful, but inherently vulnerable. Historians still meticulously study the various case studies of deposed or marginalized Joseon queens to understand the precise political and personal vulnerabilities that led to their downfall, often highlighting the complex interplay of human agency and structural forces. Furthermore, the Confucian ideals that permeated Joseon society, while emphasizing loyalty and hierarchy, also paradoxically gave fuel to your vulnerability. A queen was expected to be a paragon of virtue, dignity, and obedience. Any deviation from this ideal, however minor or fabricated, could be used as a justification for your demotion. Your perceived sins, jealousy, ill temper, lack of filial piety, could be magnified into state-threatening flaws, providing convenient excuses for those who wish to see you replaced. This moralistic scrutiny added another layer of constant pressure, ensuring that your life was a perpetual performance of perfection. So, your seemingly unshakable position as a Joseon queen was, in reality, a gilded cage built on the fickle favor of the king, constantly undermined by palace intrigue, and utterly dependent on your ability to fulfill your dynastic duties, especially producing a male heir. This precariousness, this constant awareness of your vulnerability was the first, and perhaps most pervasive, source of misery that defined the agonizing process of a royal divorce in the Joseon era. Having seen your seemingly unshakable position as queen quickly turn precarious due to the king's shifting affections, you are now faced with the terrifying reality that your removal from the throne isn't a matter of simple divorce, but a complex, public, and often brutal process. This involves justifying the unthinkable by framing your perceived failures within the rigid framework of the seven evils. Ancient Confucian tenets used to legitimize a queen's demotion or expulsion, making your fall from grace profoundly sucked. Imagine the immense pressure building. The king's disfavor becomes more obvious, perhaps through his prolonged absence from your chambers or his open favoritism towards a rival consort. Whispers from the inner court, fueled by ambitious political factions aligned with your rivals, reach a fever pitch. These factions, eager to replace you with their own candidate, would begin to meticulously gather evidence against you, not necessarily based on truth, but on any perceived flaw that could be twisted to fit the ancient criteria. It truly sucked to be put on trial by ancient dogma. The seven evils Siljogiag. Chiljogiak were a set of Confucian principles that, while theoretically applying to all wives, were wielded with devastating power against queens. These were the only legitimate grounds for a king to depose his primary consort, making them the ultimate legal and moral weapons in a royal divorce. To be accused of even one of these evils was a profound disgrace, effectively stripping you of your dignity and your right to the throne. The seven evils were disobedience to parents-in-law, bu shun fu mu, bulsun bumo. This was often the most common and easily fabricated charge. Any perceived slight against the king's mother, the queen dowager, or his deceased parents through inadequate ancestral rights could be magnified into a major offense. A queen's perceived jealousy towards the queen dowager's influence, or even a simple disagreement over palace management, could be twisted into this accusation. Childlessness, wuzi, muja, the inability to produce a male heir, was a catastrophic failure for a queen, whose primary dynastic duty was to ensure the continuation of the royal line if you had no sons, or if your sons died young while a favored consort had a healthy male child. This charge would be devastatingly effective, regardless of whether the fault lay with you or the king. Adultery, yinchang. Yumhang, this was a virtually impossible charge to prove against a queen. Given her secluded life within the palace, however, even a baseless rumor, a perceived indiscretion, or contact with male figures other than the king or eunuchs could be twisted to imply immorality. A fatal blow to a queen's reputation. Jealousy, ji-du, jiltu. This was a particularly insidious charge, as jealousy was considered an unvirtuous trait for a Confucian wife. Any attempt to assert your authority over consorts, any display of displeasure at the king's favoritism, or any move to curb a rival's influence could be spun as jealousy, providing grounds for demotion. This made it impossible to defend yourself without confirming the accusation. It truly sucked to be damned if you do, and damned if you don't. Hereditary disease, ag. Akjil, if a queen suffered from a serious, debilitating illness, especially one that was perceived to be hereditary or incurable, it could be used as grounds for her removal, as it implied an inability to fulfill her duties or transmit a healthy lineage. Talkativeness, ko-she, guseol. This charge referred to gossip, slander, or speaking out of turn. A queen's words carried immense weight, and any loose talk or perceived manipulation through verbal means could be seen as disrupting court harmony or interfering in politics. Leading to this accusation, theft chidao, joldo accusations of stealing palace property or misusing royal funds, however unlikely for a queen, could be levied if political enemies sought to portray her as corrupt or unfit. Imagine the agonizing process of these accusations being formally levied against you. Scholar officials, aligned with rival factions, would present memorials to the king, formally outlining your alleged evils. Debates would ensue in the court, dissecting your every past action, your every word, twisting it to fit these ancient categories. You would be unable to defend yourself directly in these public forums. Your fate debated by men in the outer court, far from your hearing. It really sucked to be tried by proxy. The king's personal feelings, while crucial, were often swayed by these political pressures. He might genuinely believe the accusations, or he might use them as a convenient pretext to remove a queen he no longer favored, or whose family had become too politically powerful. The process was a meticulous theatrical performance, designed to provide a legal and moral justification for a decision that might have already been made for personal or political reasons. One common misconception is that queens were often deposed solely due to the king's infatuation with a new consort, while a king's affection for a consort like Jang Huibin for King Sukjong could certainly be a catalyst. It rarely served as the sole official justification. Instead, political factions would then work to find or fabricate evidence that fit one of the 7 evils to legitimize the queen's removal, emphasizing the importance of adherence to Confucian legal and moral tenets in Joseon society. Historians still meticulously study court chronicles like the veritable records of the Joseon Dynasty to analyze the specific charges levied against deposed queens, often finding recurring patterns in the types of accusations and the political motivations behind them. Furthermore, the process of formal accusation would often involve investigations within the palace. Court ladies and eunuchs, who might have served as spies for rival factions, could be coerced or bribed into providing testimony against you, your personal life, your daily habits, your private conversations. All would be scrutinized and twisted to fit the narrative of your alleged evil. This profound invasion of privacy and the betrayal by those who served you would be a deeply humiliating and terrifying experience, turning your own household into a source of condemnation. The very concept of a royal divorce was almost unheard of in the modern sense. A queen's marriage was a sacred union meant to stabilize the dynasty. Her demotion was thus not a simple separation, but a profound rupture of cosmic order, requiring immense political will and meticulous justification through these ancient, rigid tenets. This made your downfall not just a personal tragedy, but a state-sanctioned judgment of your moral and dynastic fitness. So, your downfall as a Joseon queen was initiated by the horrifying process of justifying the unthinkable, meticulously framing your perceived flaws within the rigid, unforgiving categories of the 7 evils. This brutal process of accusation, political machination, and public moral condemnation, built on flimsy pretexts and ancient dogma, was designed to strip you of your dignity and your position, making your royal divorce a profoundly sucked experience long before you even left the palace. Having been stripped of your dignity through the meticulous application of the 7 evils, you, the now accused queen, were plunged into the brutal reality of being a political pawn. Forget any notion of personal agency or a fair defense. Your fate was a predetermined outcome in a ruthless game of factions and power struggles, making your royal divorce profoundly sucked. Imagine the terrifying realization that your personal tragedy was merely a subplot in a much larger, more cynical drama. Your downfall was not simply about the king's disfavor or your alleged evils. It was a meticulously orchestrated move by powerful scholar official factions, Dongin versus Seoin, Namin versus Buchan. Depending on the era eager to gain ascendancy, your rival consort was merely their instrument, and you were the sacrificial lamb. It truly sucked to be a human chess piece. These political factions, driven by ambition and the desire for control over the court and government, would leverage your downfall to achieve their aims. If your birth family was strong, your demotion would be a direct attack on their power, designed to weaken them and open up positions for rival clans. If your family was already vulnerable, your fall would be expedited to crush them entirely, preventing any future resurgence. You were a pawn, and your value lay in how effectively your removal could disrupt the existing balance of power. The process of your demotion would involve intense court debates and machinations in the outer court, far from your hearing. Powerful officials would present endless memorials to the king, detailing your alleged transgressions, interpreting every past action in the worst possible light. These were not genuine legal arguments. They were thinly veiled political attacks designed to sway the king and the court against you. You had no voice in these proceedings, no opportunity to defend yourself against the fabricated accusations or the politically motivated interpretations of your life. Your fate was decided by men in distant halls, their words dripping with ambition, not justice. It really sucked to be condemned by rumors you couldn't refute. Your own birth family, Ochak, while initially your strongest support, would also become a target. Your downfall would inevitably drag them into political ruin. Their titles might be stripped, their wealth confiscated, their members banished, imprisoned, or even executed, accused of conspiring with you or attempting to undermine the throne. This familial destruction would be a profound agony. Knowing that your personal tragedy had unleashed such devastation upon your loved ones? Imagine the desperate pleas from your parents or brothers begging you to find a way to mitigate the disaster. A burden almost heavier than your own impending doom. The king's role in this political game was complex. He might be genuinely infatuated with a new consort and desire to elevate her, using the political factions as a tool to achieve his personal desires. Or he might be a weak king, easily swayed by the most vocal or powerful faction, sacrificing you to maintain political stability or his own tenuous control, in some cases. A king might even engineer your downfall himself to consolidate power or break the influence of your birth family, regardless. His decision was the ultimate arbiter, but his motivations were rarely purely personal. They were always intertwined with the brutal realities of Joseon court politics. This dynamic of being a pawn created a profound sense of powerlessness. Despite your supreme status as queen, you had little true autonomy. Your life was a public spectacle, and your fate was determined by forces far beyond your control. You were constantly aware that your dignity, your position, and your very life were held hostage by the shifting alliances and ruthless ambitions of others. This lack of agency, even in the midst of immense privilege, was a crushing psychological burden. It really sucked to be all-powerful on paper, but powerless in reality? One common misconception is that all Joseon kings were always the ultimate drivers of every political decision, including the deposition of a queen. While the king's final decree was essential, the process was often heavily influenced, if not outright orchestrated, by powerful scholar official factions who would present compelling and often fabricated reasons for the queen's removal. The king often acted as a crucial, but not always entirely independent, participant in a complex power struggle, balancing his own desires with the political realities and the pressures from his court. Historians still meticulously study the detailed court records of various queen depositions, analyzing the power dynamics between the king, the queen's birth family, and rival political factions, revealing a nuanced picture of shifting influences rather than a simple top-down command. Furthermore, the very act of being a pawn meant that your reputation would be utterly destroyed in the process. The accusations levied against you, however false or exaggerated, would be publicly recorded in the official chronicles, forever tainting your name and legacy. You would be remembered not as a virtuous queen, but as a figure of controversy, a symbol of failure or alleged evil. This posthumous vilification, often orchestrated by the victorious faction, ensured that your personal tragedy would be etched into history as a moral lesson for future generations, robbing you of even a clean historical record. The psychological toll of being a political scapegoat, of watching your entire world crumble around you for reasons often unrelated to your actual conduct, would be immense. The betrayal by those you might have trusted, the public humiliation, and the profound injustice of it all would leave indelible scars on your psyche, turning your gilded cage into a tomb of despair long before your physical demise. You were a living sacrifice on the altar of political ambition. Your suffering a necessary step in someone else's ascent to power. So, your downfall as a Joseon Queen was profoundly sucked because it reduced you to a political pawn. Caught in a ruthless game of factions and power struggles, your personal tragedy was meticulously orchestrated to serve larger political aims, stripping you of dignity, shattering your family, and leaving you powerless in the face of a predetermined fate. This brutal manipulation, this profound lack of agency, was a defining and agonizing aspect of a royal divorce in the Joseon era. Having been reduced to a mere political pawn, your personal tragedy meticulously orchestrated by ruthless factions, you, the deposed queen, now faced the horrifying reality of public humiliation. Forget the quies. Dignified removal, your fall from grace was a meticulously choreographed spectacle designed to strip you of your titles, your dignity, and your very connection to the palace, making your royal divorce profoundly sucked. Imagine the day, the news of your official deposition, decreed by the king after intense court debates, would be announced. This wasn't a private matter, it was a state affair, a public declaration of your downfall. You, who once commanded reverence and obedience, were now formally stripped of your supreme title. The Joseon Queen. You might be reduced to the status of a commoner, or perhaps a lower-ranking consort, or even be given a demeaning new title signifying your disgrace. Imagine being stripped of your identity, your very name, in front of the entire court. It truly sucked to be formally disgraced. The actual removal from the palace would be a scene of agonizing public spectacle. You would be escorted, not with the pomp and ceremony of a queen, but with a grim, somber retinue, out of the magnificent royal residence that had been your gilded cage. You would walk through the very courtyards where you once presided with dignity, past the palace gates where you once entered in triumph, now under the silent, scrutinizing gaze of guards, eunuchs, and court ladies, many of whom had once served you, and who would now witness your profound degradation. Every step would be a public declaration of your fall. Your royal robes and elaborate regalia would be meticulously removed, often as part of the public ceremony of demotion. The magnificent silks, the priceless jewels, the intricate ornaments that symbolized your power and status, all would be stripped away. You would be dressed in plain, simple attire, perhaps a commoner's garb, a stark visual representation of your lost rank and dignity. Imagine the cold silence of the attendants as they removed each layer of your former glory, leaving you exposed and vulnerable, your stripped body a canvas of your profound loss. It really sucked to be undressed of your power. Even your personal possessions within the palace might be confiscated. Your most cherished items, your private chambers, your attendants, all would be taken from you, leaving you with nothing but the clothes on your back and the crushing weight of your disgrace. This act of dispossession was designed to sever your every tie to the royal household, erasing your presence as if you had never been queen. The destination of your public removal would not be a new, dignified residence, but a place of confinement and ignominy. You might be sent to a remote, dilapidated annex within the palace grounds, a forgotten corner reserved for disgraced royal women, Or in more severe cases, you could be exiled from the palace entirely, sent to a provincial residence, a private villa belonging to your birth family if they still had one and were not also ruined, or even to a Buddhist temple, far from the capital, and any lingering influence. This physical banishment reinforced your social and political annihilation. The public nature of your humiliation was crucial for the king and the triumphant factions. It served as a stark warning to others who might challenge royal authority or engage in similar evils. It was a public demonstration of the consequences of disfavor, a theatrical display of the king's absolute power and the ruthlessness of court politics. Your personal tragedy was meticulously exploited for political ends, ensuring that your suffering served as a powerful lesson for all who witnessed or heard of it. It really sucked to be a cautionary tale. One common misconception is that the deposition of a Joseon Queen was purely a personal matter for the king. While his will was central, the entire process was deeply political, requiring the consensus or at least the acquiescence of powerful scholar official factions who would meticulously build a case against the queen, often drawing upon Confucian moral tenets, the seven evils as discussed in Chapter 2. The public rituals of demotion were essential to legitimize the king's decision in the eyes of both the court and the populace. Turning a personal conflict into a state-sanctioned judgment, historians still meticulously study the detailed court chronicles, veritable records of the Joseon Dynasty and royal protocols surrounding queenly depositions to understand the precise legal, political, and ceremonial aspects of these traumatic events, revealing how every step was designed to underscore the queen's fall from grace. Furthermore, the very act of your public demotion could incite or reflect public opinion, depending on how well the accusations against you resonated with the populace or how sympathetic they were to your plight. Your removal could lead to murmurs of discontent or, conversely, public approbation. While you wouldn't directly witness such reactions, the knowledge that your public disgrace was being discussed and judged by the common people, those you once symbolically mothered, would add another layer of profound humiliation to your already unbearable situation. The psychological toll of this public stripping away of your identity and dignity would be immense. You, who had been trained from childhood in meticulous court protocol, who had lived a life of supreme status, were now publicly declared unfit, stripped bare, and cast out. The memory of the silent, scrutinizing gazes, the cold formality of the attendants removing your regalia, and the stark contrast between your former grandeur and your new humiliation would be indelibly etched into your mind, haunting you for the rest of your life. This profound trauma would leave you a broken, deeply wounded individual, forever marked by your public disgrace. So, your royal divorce was profoundly sucked because your fall from grace was a meticulously choreographed act of public humiliation, stripped of your titles, your robes, and your possessions, and banished from the palace in disgrace. Your personal tragedy was transformed into a theatrical spectacle designed to reinforce the king's power and punish perceived defiance. This agonizing public degradation was a defining and devastating aspect of being a deposed Joseon queen, ensuring that your miserable end was witnessed by all. Having been stripped of your titles and publicly disgraced, you, the deposed queen, were then cast out of the magnificent palace, facing the chilling reality of exile. Forget a quiet, dignified retreat. Your banishment was a lonely, dangerous freedom, a profound severance from the only world you had ever truly known, making your royal divorce profoundly sucked. Imagine the final procession, not of triumph, but of profound ignominy. You would be escorted by royal guards, Perhaps not in chains, but certainly under close watch, out of the very gates you once entered with such pomp and ceremony. The vast, intricate palace, once your gilded cage, now became a distant memory, replaced by an unfamiliar, often hostile, world. Your destination would be a place of confinement, not comfort or provincial residence. Perhaps a dilapidated villa belonging to a distant branch of your family if they hadn't also been ruined, or even a Buddhist temple where you might be forced to live a monastic life, stripped of your earthly grandeur. It truly sucked to be banished to a spiritual retirement home. This exile meant profound isolation. You were cut off from the capital, from the complex web of court politics, and from any remaining influence you might have had. Your access to information would be severely limited, relying on unreliable rumors or the carefully filtered reports of sympathetic and courageous visitors. If any, you would live in a state of enforced solitude, separated from the familiar routines and the thousands of attendants who once catered to your every whim. The grandeur of the palace was replaced by the stark, often lonely, reality of a provincial existence where your former status was a ghost that haunted your every step. The very landscape of your exile reinforced this profound severance. You would be far from the familiar mountains and rivers of Hanyang, transplanted to a distant province where customs and dialects might be subtly different. This geographical isolation, combined with your shattered reputation, ensured that you remained an outsider, perpetually aware of your fall from grace. Even in exile, your life was far from truly free. You were under constant surveillance. Royal spies and local officials would meticulously monitor your every move, your every visitor, your every word. This was to ensure you harbored no thoughts of rebellion, engaged in no plots to regain your throne, and posed no threat to the new queen or the king. Imagine living every day under the silent, watchful eyes of unseen informants, knowing that any perceived transgression could lead to even harsher punishment or, ultimately, your death. This omnipresent surveillance meant that your freedom was a cruel illusion, your exile merely a larger, less gilded prison. It really sucked to be a watched woman. The financial implications of your exile were often severe. While you might be given a small stipend or provided with a residence, it would be a stark downgrade from your former life. You would lose access to the vast resources of the royal household. Your servants would be few and often, less loyal than those who once served you in the palace, managing your meager finances. A task you might never have had to perform as queen would become a new source of stress and humiliation. Your former opulence would be a distant, mocking memory. The vulnerability to further political machinations was immense. Even in exile, you remained a potential threat or a useful tool for various factions. A new political alignment in the capital, a change in the king's favor, or the death of a powerful supporter could lead to further persecution. You were perpetually at risk, a target for those who wished to ensure your permanent marginalization or to completely erase your influence. Your physical distance from the court offered little protection from its ruthless currents. One common misconception is that all deposed Joseon queens lived in extreme poverty in exile, while their circumstances were a stark contrast to palace life. Their actual living conditions varied significantly depending on the king's temperament, the political influence of their remaining family, and the specific era. Some might have been given relatively comfortable provincial residences, while others faced severe deprivation. However, even comfortable exile meant a profound loss of status, power, and freedom, ensuring a miserable existence compared to their former lives. Historians still meticulously study local government records and private accounts to piece together the diverse realities of a deposed queen's exile, often finding a range of circumstances from mere banishment to outright deprivation. Furthermore, the very act of banishment was a profound public statement. It served as a stark warning to others who might challenge royal authority or fall out of favor. Your personal tragedy was meticulously exploited for political ends, ensuring that your suffering served as a powerful lesson for all who witnessed or heard of it. Your exile was not just a personal punishment, it was a visible symbol of the king's power and the ruthlessness of court politics. The psychological toll of exile would be immense. You, who had once held supreme status, were now stripped bare, both physically and socially. The profound loneliness, the constant surveillance, the gnawing anxiety about your future, and the irreversible loss of your former life would lead to deep despair. You would be haunted by memories of your grandeur, contrasting sharply with the mundane or even squalid realities of your new existence. This profound trauma would leave you a broken, deeply wounded individual, perpetually living in the shadow of your former self. So, your royal divorce was profoundly sucked because your public disgrace led to a life of exile, stripped of your titles, possessions, and your very connection to the palace. You were cast out into a lonely, dangerous freedom, a profound severance from the only world you had ever truly known. This constant surveillance, combined with profound isolation and financial insecurity, made your banishment a defining and utterly miserable aspect of being a deposed Joseon Queen. Even as you endured the profound isolation of exile and the crushing weight of public disgrace, your downfall as a Joseon Queen sent shockwaves far beyond your personal suffering, directly impacting those who loved you most. Your personal tragedy inevitably led to the ruin of your entire birth family, making your royal divorce profoundly sucked. Imagine the terrifying ripple effect. Your demotion and exile were not simply a judgment against you, they were a meticulously orchestrated attack on your birth family, Usiog, Ochak. In Joseon society, family lineage was everything. Your family's prestige, wealth, and political influence were inextricably linked to your position as queen. When you fell from grace, they were almost guaranteed to fall with you, a brutal consequence of the intertwined nature of royal power and familial ambition. It truly sucked to be a burden on your own family. The immediate consequence for your birth family would be political purge. Those who had benefited from your influence, your father, your brothers, your uncles, and other male relatives who held high office, would be systematically stripped of their titles, their official positions, and their power. They would be accused of various transgressions, often fabricated or exaggerated, such as corruption, abuse of power, or even treason, all designed to legitimize their removal from the court and public life. Imagine watching your father, once a respected minister, being publicly disgraced, his career and reputation utterly destroyed by your downfall. Beyond political ruin, your family would face severe financial devastation. Their wealth, often accumulated through their positions of power and royal patronage, would be confiscated by the state. Their lands might be seized, their assets frozen, and their private residences raided. They would be reduced to a state of profound poverty, their lavish lifestyle abruptly ended, and their very means of survival stripped away. This swift economic ruin would shatter their household, often forcing them to sell off cherished heirlooms or even resort to begging. It really sucked to see your family become paupers because of you. The ultimate horror for your male relatives could be banishment, imprisonment, or even execution. Those deemed particularly influential or dangerous to the new political order might be exiled to remote provinces, thrown into dark, damp prisons, or, in severe cases of alleged treason or undermining the throne, condemned to death. History records numerous instances of a deposed queen's male relatives meeting tragic ends, either by forced suicide or brutal execution, serving as a terrifying warning to other ambitious families. Imagine living with the knowledge that your removal from the throne directly led to the death or suffering of your beloved father or brother. This moral burden would be immense, a torment perhaps greater than your own. Or your female relatives, your mother, your sisters, your aunts would also suffer immensely. They would share in the social disgrace, often facing ostracization and public contempt. Their future prospects, particularly for marriage, would be severely diminished. They would endure the shame and the financial hardship, stripped of their former comforts and dignity, while not subject to the same legal punishments as the men. Their lives would be irrevocably shattered by your downfall. It really sucked to watch your mother weep for your loss. This ripple effect of ruin served a crucial political purpose for the king and the triumphant factions. By utterly destroying the deposed queen's birth family, they ensured that there would be no lingering power base, no potential for a future counter-coup or resurgence of influence. It was a brutal but effective way to consolidate power and eliminate rivals, using the queen as the primary instrument of this familial destruction. Your personal tragedy was meticulously exploited for systematic political eradication. One common misconception is that a Joseon Queen's birth family always posed a direct threat to the king. While powerful maternal relatives could indeed challenge royal authority, often leading to fierce political struggles, the reason for their downfall was often cyclical. Kings would elevate a queen's family to gain support, but then later seek to curb their influence if they became too powerful, sometimes by orchestrating the queen's removal. This created a recurring pattern of elevation and brutal suppression of queens' families throughout Joseon history. Driven by the inherent tensions of a centralized monarchy, historians still meticulously study these cyclical power dynamics between royal in-laws and the throne, often using detailed court records to map out the precise genealogies and political fates of these interconnected families. Furthermore, the very loyalty and support your birth family had shown you, their efforts to advance your position as queen, were now twisted into accusations against them. Their ambition, once a source of strength, became proof of their alleged treachery. This perverse reversal of fortune, where their very efforts to support you led to their ruin, added a layer of profound injustice to the entire tragic process. The psychological toll on you, the deposed queen, would be immense. You would not only be grieving your own lost status and freedom, but also the profound destruction of your entire family, knowing that your personal fate was the direct cause of their suffering. This overwhelming guilt, this realization that your former privilege had become a curse for your loved ones, would be a constant, gnawing torment, far heavier than any physical chains. You were a living symbol of a family destroyed, a constant reminder of the terrible price of power. So your royal divorce was profoundly sucked because it led to the ruin of your entire birth family. Your personal downfall was meticulously orchestrated to become a systematic political purge, stripping your loved ones of their titles, wealth, and freedom, and often condemning them to imprisonment or death. This devastating ripple effect of disgrace, this profound familial destruction, was a defining and agonizing aspect of a royal divorce in the Joseon era, ensuring that your misery was shared by all who bore your name. Even as your heart bled for the ruin of your birth family and your spirit wrestled with the crushing weight of your disgrace. A particularly cruel and heartbreaking consequence of your royal divorce awaited you, the loss of your children. Forget any notion of shared custody or visitation rights. You would be brutally separated from your own flesh and blood, with limited or no contact, making your fall from grace a mother's profound agony, and your royal divorce profoundly sucked. Imagine the terrifying moment. After your official demotion and public disgrace, you would be immediately separated from your children, your young crown prince. Your beloved daughters all would be taken from your care. You would not be allowed to embrace them, to explain what was happening, or to offer comfort. Your maternal rights, once absolute as queen, would be utterly stripped away. Your children would remain in the palace under the care of the new queen, royal consorts, or court ladies, their upbringing now dictated by your former rivals. It truly sucked to have your children taken from you. The reason for this brutal separation was deeply rooted in Joseon dynastic politics. Your children, especially the crown prince, were royal property, belonging to the state and the royal lineage, not solely to you as an individual mother. Your deposition meant you were deemed unfit to be their mother. Morally or politically, allowing you continued contact could be seen as a threat to the stability of the throne, a means for you to plot a return to power, or to instill disloyalty in the future king. Your children were crucial political pawns, and your continued influence over them was deemed too dangerous. Your contact with your children would be severely limited. If not entirely severed, you might never see them again. If any contact was permitted, it would be through formal, heavily monitored visits, perhaps only on rare occasions or under strict supervision, designed to prevent any personal connection or covert communication. Imagine seeing your young son, the crown prince you carried and nurtured, now bowing formally to you as a disgraced figure, surrounded by guards, his eyes perhaps filled with confusion or fear, and being unable to offer him a private embrace or a comforting word. This profound emotional distance, this forced alienation, would be an agonizing, perpetual torment. It really sucked to be a queen who couldn't mother her own children. The psychological toll on you, the mother, would be immense. You would constantly worry about your children's well-being in the treacherous palace environment, knowing they were surrounded by the very factions who had orchestrated your downfall. You would grieve the loss of their childhoods, unable to witness their growth, to guide their education, or to offer them maternal affection. The pain of this separation, this forced abandonment, would be a constant, gnawing agony, a wound that would never truly heal. Your spiritual life, tied to your lineage, would feel hollowed by this profound loss. For your children, especially the crown prince, your disgrace and removal would also be deeply traumatic. They would be forced to reconcile the beloved mother they knew with the publicly condemned figure they were now told you were. They would be caught between loyalty to you and obedience to the new power structure. This emotional turmoil, coupled with the pressure to conform and thrive in the dangerous palace environment, would shape their own lives, perhaps leading to resentment, fear, or a desperate need to avoid your fate. One common misconception is that a deposed queen's children were automatically disgraced as well. While their position would certainly be impacted by their mother's downfall, the crown prince, if he was your son, would generally retain his status, as his legitimacy stemmed from his father, the king. And the royal lineage, however, his life would become far more precarious, subjected to intense scrutiny and manipulation by those who wished to elevate a rival prince. The king would carefully manage the crown prince's relationship with his disgraced mother to ensure loyalty to the throne. Historians still meticulously study the subsequent lives of children of deposed queens, often finding evidence of deep psychological scars and complex political maneuvering around their education and marriage. Furthermore, the very purpose of a Joseon queen was to produce and raise heirs to be separated from them, particularly male heirs, was not just a personal tragedy, but a profound symbolic failure. It negated your primary dynastic duty, amplifying the sense of your personal and political ruin. This complete removal from your children underscored your utter disposability in the eyes of the state. The constant surveillance in your exile would prevent any meaningful attempts to reconnect with your children or to receive reliable, unfiltered news about them. Any surreptitious contact would be considered treasonous, risking severe punishment for both you and your children. This created an unbreachable barrier, a wall of separation that cemented your profound loneliness and maternal agony. Your love, once a source of comfort, became a source of danger for them. So your royal divorce was profoundly sucked because it inflicted upon you the loss of your children, brutally separated from your flesh and blood, denied the fundamental joys of motherhood, and forced to endure the agonizing emotional distance. Your downfall became a perpetual source of maternal agony. This devastating consequence, transforming your royal duty into a heartbreaking deprivation, was a defining and soul-crushing aspect of being a deposed Joseon queen, even as you, the deposed queen, grappled with the agonizing separation from your children and the crushing reality of exile. Your life was far from free. Instead, you found yourself living under a regime of constant surveillance. Your every move, every visitor, every word meticulously monitored. This pervasive watchfulness ensured no plots could brew and no counter-movements could be attempted, making your freedom a profound illusion and your royal divorce profoundly sucked. Imagine your daily existence in your place of exile, whether a provincial villa, a remote annex of the palace, or a secluded Buddhist temple. You might be physically isolated, but you were never truly alone. The king, the new queen, and the triumphant political factions understood that even a deposed queen, especially one who had produced heirs, remained a potential focal point for opposition. Your very existence, however disgraced, was a symbolic threat, and thus, you were deemed worthy of constant meticulous observation. It truly sucked to be spied on by your former subjects. Royal spies and local officials would be your unseen companions. They would monitor who visited you, how long they stayed, and what was discussed. Your letters, if you were allowed to send or receive any, would be intercepted and read. Any attempts to communicate secretly with your family, if they hadn't also been ruined or former allies, would be detected. Imagine having conversations in hushed tones, constantly looking over your shoulder, never truly knowing who was listening, whose loyalty was genuine, or which seemingly innocuous interaction might be reported and twisted into an accusation of treason. This omnipresent surveillance would breed deep paranoia and a profound distrust of everyone around you. The purpose of this constant surveillance was explicit to prevent any plots or counter-movements to restore you to the throne. Your former allies, or those who resented the new political order, might attempt to rally support around you. The king and his court would fear that you might try to influence your children, especially the crown prince, or that your birth family, if they still had any influence, might plot your return. This constant fear of your potential as a symbol of rebellion meant that your freedom was nothing more than a carefully managed illusion, designed to keep you powerless and isolated. It really sucked to be considered a ghost of a threat. Even your personal routines would be monitored. Your health, your mood, your activities, all would be discreetly observed and reported. This provided valuable intelligence to the court, allowing them to assess your current state, anticipate any potential actions, and ensure that your physical and mental well-being did not pose an unexpected political problem. Your privacy, once limited, now virtually ceased to exist. The financial allowances provided to you in exile, if any, were also carefully controlled. This ensured that you had no independent means to gather support, bribe officials, or fund any subversive activities. Your dependence on the court for your sustenance was a key mechanism of your control, ensuring you remained powerless and compliant. This constant surveillance also created a profound sense of psychological imprisonment. Even if you were physically outside the palace walls, your mind remained trapped. You would live in perpetual anxiety, unable to truly relax or find peace. The constant awareness of being watched, judged, and potentially misconstrued would erode your spirit, leading to feelings of helplessness, resentment, and profound despair. The freedom of exile was a cruel mirage, for your mind remained in a gilded cage of suspicion. It really sucked to be mentally shackled in your own home. One common misconception is that once a Joseon queen was deposed and exiled, she was no longer a concern for the court. In reality, deposed queens, especially those who had given birth to a crown prince, remained highly sensitive political figures. Their continued existence, however diminished, served as a rallying point for disaffected factions and a constant reminder of political instability. This is why their surveillance was so rigorous and sustained. Historians still meticulously study the detailed entries in the veritable records of the Joseon Dynasty and the records of the Royal Secretariat Seongjong-won Ilgi, which often include specific reports on the activities and visitors of deposed royal women, confirming the intense and prolonged nature of their surveillance. Furthermore, the very methods of surveillance would adapt to your perceived threat. If you attempted to communicate secretly, or if there were any signs of external interest in your well-being, the watch would intensify with more guards, stricter controls, and harsher punishments for those caught aiding you. This created a chilling feedback loop, where any attempt to reclaim autonomy only tightened the metaphorical chains around you, the psychological toll on your former attendants. Those loyal few who might choose to follow you into exile would also be immense. They too would live under constant surveillance, their loyalty tested, and their lives put at risk by their association with you. This further constrained your ability to form genuine bonds, as your very presence became a danger to those around you. So, your royal divorce was profoundly sucked because your life in exile was one of constant surveillance. Stripped of your power and banished from the palace, you were still a prisoner. Every move meticulously monitored, every word potentially reported. This pervasive watchfulness ensured no plots could brew and no true freedom could ever be found, making your supposedly private suffering a meticulously controlled aspect of the Joseon dynasty's enduring political stability. Even as your spirit withered under the constant surveillance and your body languished in exile, your life as a deposed Joseon queen was perpetually overshadowed by the most terrifying and ultimate threat, the possibility of poison, assassination, or forced suicide. Forget natural death. Your continued existence, however diminished, remained a political liability, making your royal divorce profoundly sucked. Imagine the pervasive fear, that would settle over you, day and night. In your secluded residence, you knew intimately the ruthless nature of palace politics. You had seen how rivals were eliminated, how threats were neutralized, and now you were the neutralized threat, or at least a potential one. The king, the new queen, or the victorious political factions might decide that your continued existence, even in exile, was too risky, too much of a rallying point for disaffected elements. A quiet, politically convenient death would be their ultimate solution. It truly sucked to be on a hit list. The most insidious method was poison. Imagine being served your daily meal, a seemingly innocuous bowl of rice or a cup of herbal tea. You would scrutinize it, perhaps making a servant taste it first, a desperate, risky act, or simply agonizing over every bite and sip. The fear of a tasteless, odorless poison, slowly introduced over days or weeks, would be immense. Your mind would race, questioning every ache, every moment of fatigue. Was it just your aging body? Or was it the insidious hand of your enemies at work? The paranoia would be constant, turning nourishment into a source of terror. It really sucked when your food was a threat. History is replete with chilling examples of royal women in Joseon, Korea, who met their ends through such methods. Queen Yoon, mother of King Yeonsangun, after her deposition, was famously forced to drink poison, a direct order from the king himself, under pressure from his maternal relatives and powerful factions. Imagine the scene: royal emissaries arriving at your residence, bearing a bowl of bitter, dark liquid, explaining that it is the king's decree that you must drink it for the sake of the dynasty. There would be no escape, no refusal. Your last moments would be filled with the bitter taste of betrayal and the slow, agonizing descent into death, forced to participate in your own execution. It really sucked to be condemned to a forced suicide. Beyond explicit poisoning, there was the threat of assassination. If a direct legal order for your death was deemed too politically risky, or if your enemies feared you might resist a forced suicide, a sudden illness or an unfortunate accident could be arranged. You might be found dead in your chambers, the cause of death conveniently attributed to natural causes, but with the chilling knowledge that a silent hand had ended your life. This made every unfamiliar face, every unusual sound, a source of intense dread. Your exile, meant to be safe, was in reality a vulnerable waiting room for death. The threat was often greatest when there was a shift in political power or when the king's health declined. A new king, or a new faction gaining ascendancy, might see your complete eradication as necessary to secure their power. A king on his deathbed might issue final decrees to cleanse the court of old threats, including you. This made moments of political instability, paradoxically, the most dangerous for your precarious existence. The justification for such drastic measures was always framed in terms of dynastic stability and the well-being of the realm. A deposed queen, especially one who had produced a crown prince, represented a constant potential rallying point for opposition, a lingering threat to the new order. Your complete removal, even if it meant your death, was argued as a necessary sacrifice for the peace and security of the dynasty. Your life was an expendable pawn in the grand game of power. One common misconception is that all deposed queens were immediately executed. While some met tragic ends, many lived out their lives in exile, albeit under strict surveillance. The decision to execute or force suicide was a drastic political move, often undertaken only when a deposed queen was perceived to be an active threat, attempting to plot a return, or her family gaining too much influence, or when a new ruthless faction came to power. The degree of leniency often depended on the specific king's temperament, the strength of the new queen's faction, and the political climate. Historians still meticulously study the various degrees of punishment for deposed queens and their families, noting the specific triggers for harsh action and how political circumstances determined whether a queen would live in exile or be condemned to death. Furthermore, the very act of living under constant surveillance, knowing that death could come at any moment, would have a profound psychological toll. The paranoia, the fear of food, the distrust of everyone around you, these would erode your spirit, leaving you in a perpetual state of anxiety and despair. Your existence would be a prolonged waiting game. Every day, a temporary reprieve from a final. Brutal judgment, this mental anguish, this constant terror of the inevitable was perhaps the most brutal aspect of your life in exile. The chilling reality of being a deposed queen in Joseon Korea meant that your life, once touched by ultimate power, was now defined by its imminent, often violent, cessation. The palace, once a symbol of your grandeur, became the source of your fear, and your supposed freedom in exile was nothing more than a tightly controlled existence awaiting a silent, final judgment. So, your royal divorce was profoundly sucked because it left you constantly under the terrifying threat of poison, assassination, or forced suicide. Your continued existence, however diminished, remained a political liability, making your life in exile a prolonged, agonizing wait for a brutal and inevitable end, ensuring that your royal misery culminated in a silent, tragic demise. You've endured the initial shock of your fickle favor, faced the brutal justifications of the seven evils, been reduced to a political pawn, suffered public humiliation and banishment, watched your family crumble, grappled with the agonizing loss of your children, lived under constant surveillance, and faced the terrifying threat of poison or forced suicide. As the last echoes of court intrigue fade and the phantom taste of bitter medicine dissipates, a final, chilling truth settles upon you. Your royal divorce in the Joseon era didn't just end your life as queen, it irrevocably scarred your legacy, leaving your name either forgotten or, worse, deliberately vilified by history. This ultimate erasure of your personal truth made your ordeal profoundly sucked. Consider the ultimate consequence of your downfall, the systematic erasure of your positive contributions and the deliberate vilification of your character in official historical records. In Joseon Korea, official court chronicles, the veritable records of the Joseon Dynasty, were meticulously compiled, providing the primary historical narrative. These records, however, were written by scholar officials, often those who belonged to the very political factions that had orchestrated your downfall. Their accounts would meticulously detail your alleged evils, exaggerate your flaws, and paint you as a figure of controversy, incompetence, or even malevolence, all to legitimize your deposition and demonize your birth family. Imagine your entire life being rewritten by your enemies, turning your personal tragedy into a moral lesson for future generations. It truly sucked to be historically rewritten. Your name, once revered as the Queen, the mother of the nation, would be stripped of its honorifics, perhaps referred to by a demeaning new title signifying your disgraced status, or simply by your birth name. A grave insult. Official portraits might be destroyed, or your image removed from royal genealogies. The purpose was clear: to erase your legitimacy, to sever your connection to the royal lineage, and to ensure that history remembered you not as a virtuous queen, But as a cautionary tale of misconduct or political failure, this posthumous vilification served a crucial political function for the triumphant factions. By discrediting you completely, they secured their own power, prevented any future attempts to restore your lineage, and justified their ascendancy. Your personal tragedy became a tool for propaganda, ensuring the stability of the new political order at the cost of your historical truth. Your very legacy became a battleground, and your enemies were writing the history books. Even if you had made significant positive contributions during your time as queen, perhaps advocating for the poor, patronizing scholarship, or promoting cultural initiatives, these achievements would likely be omitted, downplayed, or reattributed to others in the official records. Your entire reign would be viewed through the lens of your eventual downfall, with every past action reinterpreted to fit the narrative of your alleged unworthiness. Your truth, your lived experience, was deemed irrelevant in the face of political expediency. It really sucked to have your good deeds erased. For future generations, your name would be synonymous with scandal, with the 7 evils, or with political turmoil. Students of history would read about your alleged transgressions, taught to see you as a negative example. This permanent tarnishing of your historical reputation meant that even in death, you found no peace, no vindication. Your suffering continued through your vilified legacy. The contrast with the fate of revered queens was stark. Virtuous queens were celebrated, their names praised in ancestral rites, their lives held up as paragons of Confucian virtue. You, the deposed queen, were denied this honor, relegated to the shadows of historical condemnation, or worse, outright forgotten by subsequent generations who might never even hear your name spoken without whispers of scandal. One unique detail, though often tragic, is the occasional posthumous rehabilitation of a deposed queen. In some rare instances throughout Joseon history, a later king, perhaps a grandson or great-grandson, might attempt to rehabilitate a disgraced queen if he felt her deposition was unjust or politically motivated, and if it served his own political agenda to do so. This involved issuing royal decrees that formally cleared her name, restored her titles often posthumously, and allowed her to be enshrined in the royal ancestral shrine. Such rehabilitations, however, were rare, often politically fraught, and occurred long after the deposed queen's death, highlighting the incredible difficulty of altering an established historical narrative. Historians still meticulously study these instances of rehabilitation, often using them as crucial counter-narratives to the official vilifications found in the veritable records, revealing the ongoing political struggles even centuries after a queen's passing. Furthermore, the very act of your demotion, whether by the king's explicit order or through political pressure, would have been recorded in the daily logs of the royal secretariat Seungjongwan Ilgi, which later formed the basis for the veritable records. These daily records, while incredibly detailed, were compiled by officials who were often part of the prevailing political winds. Thus, even the raw, supposedly objective, daily entries could be subtly biased against you, laying the groundwork for your later full-scale vilification. Your enemies were literally keeping the records. The psychological toll on your surviving family, particularly your children if they were allowed to live, would be immense. They would live under the shadow of your disgraced legacy, constantly striving to prove their own loyalty and virtue to the new regime, often forced to denounce or distance themselves from your memory to secure their own positions. Your personal tragedy became an intergenerational burden, a stain on your family name that might take centuries to wash away, if ever. So, Your royal divorce in the Joseon era was a devastating final act that profoundly sucked because it did not merely end your life as queen, but irrevocably scarred your legacy. Your name was either systematically forgotten, erased from the annals of virtuous queens, or worse, deliberately vilified by powerful factions who meticulously rewrote history to suit their own political ends. This ultimate erasure of your personal truth, this posthumous condemnation, ensured that your misery extended beyond the grave, forever staining your name in the annals of Korean history. You've battled through the terrifying selection process, endured a life of forced purity and isolation, suffered the violent onset of prophetic trances, grappled with the burden of cryptic pronouncements, been manipulated by political powers, and finally witnessed the slow, agonizing decline of the oracle's fame and influence, as the echoes of Apollo's voice fade into the silent mountain air and the phantom scent of laurel leaves dissipates. A profound, lingering truth settles upon you being the oracle of Delphi, for all its immense spiritual authority, was a life lived in a holy prison, a profound paradox of unparalleled wisdom and crushing loneliness, ultimately making it profoundly sucky. Consider the unimaginable personal sacrifice that defined your existence. Your life was not your own. It was seized by divine decree, stripping you of autonomy, family, and personal relationships. You lived in perpetual celibacy, cut off from the warmth of human intimacy and the joy of raising children. Your very identity as an individual woman was subsumed by your role as Apollo's mouthpiece, leaving you revered yet personally invisible, a mere vessel for a god's will. It truly sucked to be eternally revered, but never truly known. Then there's the physical and psychological toll of your sacred duties, the ritualistic purification, the terrifying descent into the adyton, and the physically violent onset of the trance, possibly induced by intoxicating gases, took a relentless toll on your body and mind. Chronic exhaustion, disorientation, vocal strain, and potential long-term health issues were the grim companions of your divine inspiration. The immense pressure of delivering prophecies that shaped the fate of nations, combined with the psychological burden of their ambiguity, created a pervasive mental anguish that offered no respite. And what about the constant demands and pervasive manipulation? You were perpetually on call, your life dictated by the endless stream of petitioners seeking guidance. Your prophecies, however sacred, were routinely twisted and exploited by cunning priests and ruthless politicians, turning you into a tool for their worldly gains. You wielded immense power, but had no true control over its application, making you a pawn in a larger game that often led to tragic outcomes for those who misinterpreted your words. This constant manipulation, this knowledge that your divine gift was being used for earthly advantage, was a profound source of misery. Finally, the ultimate irony of your decline. After centuries of unparalleled spiritual authority, the oracle's influence slowly waned. The rise of rational philosophy, the shift in political power to new empires, and the eventual triumph of new ideologies that rendered your sacred role irrelevant. You witnessed the erosion of faith, the diminishing flow of pilgrims, and the eventual silence of Apollo, leaving you, the vessel of a once mighty god, to exist in a state of historical anachronism, a profound testament to the impermanence of even divine power. It really sucked to see your life's purpose fade into irrelevance. One particularly poignant and often overlooked detail is the inherent contradiction between the Pythia's spiritual authority and her lack of worldly power. While kings and generals bowed before her, She herself lived an austere life, subject to the authority of the male priests who managed the sanctuary and interpreted her words. She held immense spiritual power, capable of influencing empires, but no temporal power. She could not command armies, levy taxes, or make laws. This stark distinction highlights the specific nature of her unique role, a channel, not a ruler, ensuring her personal confinement even amidst global influence. Historians still meticulously study the precise power dynamics within the Delphic sanctuary, debating the extent of the Pythia's personal influence versus the institutional power of the priests, often finding a complex interplay rather than simple subservience. Ultimately, the story of being the Oracle of Delphi is a profound paradox. It reveals a life of immense spiritual importance, where a woman became the voice of a god, guiding the destiny of an entire civilization. Yet, this divine calling came at an unbearable personal cost, a life of forced isolation, physical and psychological torment, relentless demands, and profound lack of autonomy. Your existence was a holy prison, a gilded cage of reverence and exploitation, ensuring that your life, for all its unparalleled wisdom, was profoundly, undeniably sucky. As you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep, let the distant whispers of ancient prophecies and the imagined presence of Apollo's divine fumes fade into the quiet background of history. You are safe, in your own time, far removed from the chilling demands of divine service and the relentless weight of an ancient oracle. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of your own autonomy and the profound freedom to choose your own path and purpose. A stark contrast to the sucky truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night, and have sweet dreams.